Hello and welcome back, and that is right, today we're going to do a hardware review of this, the TS-233. Before we go any further, I think there's one big thing we need to take from today's video when we talk about what this system can do and what it can't do, and that is a degree of separation between two simple words, cheap and value. Two words that often get completely mixed up and around the place, and ultimately about the idea about when you pay for something that you get your money's worth and you understand what you're getting for your money indeed. So in today's video, not only are we going to talk about the hardware and the software, but more predominantly throughout the whole video, we're going to look at those two words. And if ever you need a little helping hand to understand the difference between cheap and value, here's a nice way to put it up. You're going to book a flight, you're thinking to yourself, do you know what, I can't wait to go on this flight to Spain. I'm going to go out there, catch some sun, have a few drinkies, and you're thinking to yourself, I wonder how much the ticket is. And now normally the ticket will set you back about 80 quid. When you look at that ticket and it's listed online for 35, that to me is good value. To me, that is something I'm looking at there and thinking, oh, I'm getting good value for money. Now, if I look at that ticket and that ticket is £4, that's too cheap. And as far as I'm concerned, that plane ain't leaving the sodding ground. That is right. Let's talk about this, babe. It is the value series from Qnap. It's the TS-233. The packaging on it is a little bit different to what we've seen before. And in today's video, we're going to go through the hardware, talk about what it can do, what it can't do, and ultimately help you understand if this is going to be the right NAS for you. It arrives with QTS5 inside. Knocking around right now, again, the price is a little bit flexible online. When I've looked around and tried to find the price, because it's not listed in a lot of places, I want to try and get as accurate as possible. And unfortunately, it's somewhere between about 160 to 180, and of course you've got to factor in your local tax, you've got to factor in delivery, you've got to factor in your media, all the different places, different prices. But right now, all the prices I've seen seem to stem around that number, okay? Now, with this, you are looking at an ARM system, or ARM. That is an architecture that's a little bit more affordable, a little bit more efficient, and ultimately, if you're trying to compare it against more aggressive systems, with your Ryzens, with your Intel, the Pentium, Celerons, that sort of thing, this isn't going to stack up against that. There is a reason this is lower in price. And although, you know, I can see what they're going for in this value series, I think it would be remiss not to say that there are things about it I am less in love with than others. I think it's a good enough system, but when you look at the systems that came before it, the likes of the 228A, the 230, even the TASs in the past, this isn't an enormous leap over those. This is every 2 years they refresh this series, and although Qnap has been pushing 2.5G, pushing USB 3.2 Gen 2 PCIe caching, none of those things are available on this. It's still trying to keep within this remit of pricing, but at the same time, I kind of hoped some things would have changed on this that haven't. The CPU has changed, but most of the other factors about it haven't. But that's enough of this. Let's have a little look at the bad boy. So that's the box all the way around. I should highlight, I've already done some software testing on this, and later in the video we're going to talk a little bit about the software and have some of the stuff on screen. I've already got drives inside this. If you do purchase this, it doesn't arrive with storage media inside, so do bear that in mind. Inside, we've got the retail packaging there. Let's slide that out. Again, the box there, a little bit showier than some of the brown box stuff. You can see the background of the studio. That's largely because at this price level and this kind of solution, this is very much your kind of high street electronic store product. So they have to put a bit more work into the design. Kind of a combination there of kind of flashy Western images and big brand logo there, and at the same time on the back, lots of techie stuff that I know is a little bit more Eastern in its presentation there. I'll be honest, I prefer that side, but never mind. Let's chuck that over there. Also, the more astute of you may have noticed here in the background, I've got the 1-bay version of this NAS there. Now, I'm not just doing that there to, you know, any kind of synergy across these products. I'm leaving that there because right now that is doing thumbnail building there in the background. It's also running a USB backup there on the back. The reason I'm leaving it there is throughout this video, I want that to give you some idea about the noise this system can make. This is still the 2-bay version, so it's technically twice that in a number of ways, but it's actually incredibly similar. So I'm leaving that there at a distance of 1 meter between the microphone and there, just in case you can hear it throughout this video, to give you some idea about how much noise this system can generate. Because right now, with a WD red hard drive inside that one bay, you can't really hear it. And I'm next to the thing. Anyway, so if we have a look inside, first we can have a look at the accessories this system arrives with. First time setup manual there. Again, lots of resources online. We've got a Cat5e Ethernet cable there. So again, it's a 1 meter cable connected to your router or, you know, your switch or something like that. Absolutely fine. We've also got a 65 watt external PSU. Again, desktop solutions like this, particularly when they're this modest, an external PSU isn't that unusual. You want to get rid of the heat generation there. And also an external PSU, so much easier to replace there. Can't recommend that enough. Mains power cable, of course, and screws for 2.5 inch and 3.5 inch media, which you probably won't need, but I'll make that clearer later in the video. And then finally, you've got the unit itself, quite small, it has to be said. Oh, and of course, information on the 2-year warranty, as well as details to extend it to 5 years. We open this up. Again, I have already unpacked this. It will arrive a little bit prettier than this. I've had to unpack it to install the drives for doing software testing. Again, I've got testing on an overview for both the 1 bay and the 2 bay, showing exactly what it can and can't do. Because again, it's about understanding what you're getting for your money here. You're not going to get the full kind of software experience in this. All of the standard stuff is on there for multimedia. Stuff for backups is on there. Snapshots, photo cataloging, AI photo recognition is on there. There's also a lot of the security stuff that is built into there. And I know recently Qnap have taken quite a hit in terms of security stuff there, with a lot of people getting hit by deadbolt and ransomware in the past. And Qnap have upgraded and changed a lot of things there. They've also adapted a lot of the defaults, but still, nonetheless, I would still recommend, one, have a multi-tier backup system in place with, you know, cloud, another NAS far away, USB and stuff like that. But on top of that, get on those defaults, disable your admin, make sure those ports are unique. Don't just lean into the 8000 or 8001 port choices there. But again, that's for another video to go in more detail about. But this is what the system looks like. It's not absolutely huge. It's actually quite modest in scale. I can pick it up in the one hand there, and I've got quite large hands, but still, it's still pretty small. And I've got 2 hard drives inside there. I think this has got a couple of WD Reds inside there. I was wrong earlier on. That was a Seagate drive in that one. Got that mixed up in my head. The front of the chassis there, we've got, it's a white outside there, very similar to the TS-233 that came out a couple of years ago. This is the refresh of that, but it's white in design. It's also a little sharper on the edges. I quite like that about this. We've got lights there on the front that denote system activity, backup activity, network activity, and the drives themselves when they're being accessed. We've also got a USB front mounted copy port there and button, which I'll be honest, I love. Let's talk about that a little bit. Systems like this, they're incredibly modest. They're designed for people that are kind of really counting the pennies a little bit, hence that whole cheap versus value and budget stuff we talked about in the intro. But with this system, the kind of budget you're swilling towards is whether you're going to use 1 drive or 2. If you use more modest hard drives, like 6, 8 TB at most, or if you go larger than that, it's going to make a bit more noise in the larger hard drives. The amount of money people spend on devices like this is going to be considerably less. It's going to be scaled down. And one of the easiest ways to create a backup of this device is USB, I would argue. It's probably one of the most long-term affordable there, rather than paying repeatedly for cloud. Now, it is worth mentioning, of course, a NAS can be a backup device. I'm not stupid. But at the same time, if you're backing up your phone, your laptop, your tablet, all of those devices to this, and then you decide to make room on your phone by deleting stuff, make room on your laptop, or the contents of your laptop gets wiped, or you reformat, or anything like that, remember, this isn't a backup then anymore, is it? Because this is the only version of those files. That's not a backup. That means that file is as safe on your phone and laptop on its own as it is in this. So make sure you have at least 2 copies of those mission critical or important files. That's why I like this port, because a number of users will connect a USB drive directly to something like this and back up the content of the most important files or folders. So that's the whole NAS or just that mission critical data. It can be done automatically when you connect the USB. You can go into a lot of the Hybrid Backup Sync application inside there to choose how and when you want it to back up, whether you want it scheduled or triggered automatically. But the reason I'm bringing all this up is that port. I love the idea that I can just connect the USB, and press that button. Yes, the first time I do it, I've got to go into the graphical user interface and tell the system what I want it to do when I press that button. But after that, from that moment onwards, I don't have to dick around with the graphical user interface anymore when I want to back up. I don't want to rely on a schedule. I don't want to connect it and hope it's doing the backup. What I like is to connect that, and just as a peace of mind, press that button. Anyone that's ever used computer games, and let's face it, we all have, that's why you're watching a tech video, but when you play computer games that have autosave and manual save, as much as you like autosave, I mean, come on, any game you care about, you're going to double check. You're going to double check that save, and that's what that button is, double checking the save. And that's really that's the front of the chassis there. Ventilation for this is centered around the base of the device there, with ventilation coming out there passively. Nothing at the top, nothing on the sides, and there is an active 8mm fan there on the rear. If we have a look at the rear, we see a couple of things which honestly are kind of what I think hold this device back. There's three things about this device I'm not overly keen on, and I'm going to talk about two of them. The fan I quite like. I think it's modest. I think it takes up a good, decent proportion of the device. I think it works very well in pushing the air and pulling the air and ejecting it another way. But this LAN port, it's 1 gigabit Ethernet. Now I get it. It's a budget solution. This is an affordable solution. It's not designed to be beefy and powerful and putting through throughput. It's a 2-bay designed for more modest users that want local backups, maybe want to have Plex Media Server at a very, very low end, bit of streaming to their console, little bit of surveillance, maybe. Instead of all of that, you can only run 2 or 3 of these apps at once, realistically, on this kind of hardware. These aren't going to be power users, is what I'm saying. But still, given the abundance of 2.5G solutions on the Qnap portfolio, that 1 GBE port is just disappointing to me, particularly when the cost of that port isn't that wildly different these days to that of a 2.5 GBE, and that CPU architecture inside should be able to handle 2.5 GBE. Hell, Qnap make a point of highlighting that you can use the adapter that they provide, the USB to 5 GB adapter on this, so clearly the CPU isn't going to have difficulty with multi-gigabit connectivity. So that 1 GBE port for me, although it does the job, I just think it feels like the brand creating of a rigid portfolio so it doesn't overlap into some of their SMB prosumer solutions there too much. Same goes for these USB ports there. Now I mentioned the one on the front, USB 3, lovely stuff, but these are 2 USB 2 ports which are wasting my time. I don't like them. I understand if this system had an HDMI output and the CPU had embedded graphics, I could run KVM, keyboard, video, mouse. That makes a lot of sense to me. But USB 2 for me, I'm not going to use those. You can attach a printer, attach a UPS, a really slow USB drive, and a few low-level peripherals, but like 1 USB port there, I'm going to use that for a backup drive. I might use that for an expansion drive. I might even use it for an increased Ethernet connectivity like the ones behind me in the background of the studio there. But just the one port is like 1 USB port there for all of those premium accessory choices, and including these 2 USB 2s. That's almost offensive to me. I like that they're there, and I'd rather have them than not have them at all. But still, USB 2 on this and 1 GBE feels like a little bit of profiling by the brand to keep this as low as possible so it doesn't interfere with the higher tiers. It still doesn't interfere with the rest of the system, and overall I like this NAS. I just find that these ports here are a Larry letdown for me. Now, in terms of drive installation, drives are installed by removing a screw here at the base of the device. Again, I'm going to remove that for you there. And again, this is a 2-bay system. You don't necessarily have to put 2 bays in. You can get away with just putting a single drive in, but it doesn't support hot swapping because of the architecture of the way the drives go in. Indeed, you don't really need to use the screws to put hard drives inside if you're going to use 3.5-inch media. We remove the lid there. That's how the side of the chassis comes off. And there you have. I've already installed the drives inside. And again, that's because these use the click and load trays. So if I remove one of these drives, you can see they're clipped in on the sides there, no screwdriver required. Come out there. That's how easy it is to install a drive in there. No screwdriver, just flat and easy. And again, this system supports the latest hard drive. So again, at the time of recording, that's 20 TB in Seagate Iron Wolf and WD Red, for example. However, I would also highlight that if you go for drives, I mentioned, kind of touched on this earlier, if you go for drives that are larger than, like, I don't know, 8, 10 TB, they're going to make more noise. And you'll find that a modest system like this, if you do put those bigger hard drives, even though the system itself does run very quiet when it's on, I would still argue that if you use those bigger hard drives, it can't mask the clicks, hums and whirs of activity of those more enterprise level drives. So if we remove the drives there, we can see inside the SATA ports there at the back. Those SATA ports all lovely and clear, no loose wiring there. The cooling system, if we have a look at the rear there, you can see it funnels through the system and then out via the vents at the bottom, where it's kind of got a vented channel design. And at the back there, you can see quite a large heatsink there at the base there. Now that heatsink, it covers a couple of things. It covers an area of flash memory where the OS lives. It also covers the processor, which in this case is an ARM Cortex, an A55 processor, a 64-bit ARM CPU, a quad-core 2.0 gigahertz, no burst built in there, no embedded graphics either. This is a CPU that is designed to keep things as efficient as possible. And the way ARM processors do that is when command line is both delivered to and out of the processor, it compresses it so the CPU can use less power in order to get it done, which is why a lot of ARM-based processors are generally found in mobile devices and things that are going to be on for days, weeks, months, or even years at a time. So the CPU I quite like. I think it is a scale up from the current generation ARM favourite that everyone's using, which is the Realtek RTD1296. And this processor you're going to see from all the brands very, very soon. But at the same time, I'm less keen on that CPU paired with the memory inside. It's DDR4, which is great. It's 2 gig, which is great. But you can't upgrade it. It's soldered memory inside, which you can't remove and pop in like an 8 gig stick. And 2 gig of memory on this, you're going to use a quarter to maybe even a third of that just running the system. And the minute you run a few applications, that memory is going to get eaten up real fast. This device, and indeed the one bay behind, just to my right, they are not designed to be multi-user environments. They are designed to do a small handful of things and just have a little bit of patience with it. And I think a lot of users that save a bit of the money to get a hold of a device like this may, if they go in with the wrong expectations, that money that they're going to save is going to be utterly lost in the extra time it's going to take to get some more complex tasks done. So keep your expectations realistic on a device like this. Now, I say all that, the system itself is still very, very efficient and still gets a lot of Qnap services done. It can handle 4K and 1080p. It can handle all of that backup and filing. It even not only has AI-powered photo recognition and some AI services built into the surveillance platform, how many of which I'm not sure are supported on this, but it also has utilization of a dedicated AI component built into it there. They mention it on the box, so I can find the box anywhere around here. They go to great trouble to mention that MPU AI component there, which allows the system to have a dedicated processor for AI processing, which is great for searching and finding and indexing, as well as within those photo recognition softwares that allow photos to be indexed much quicker, as well as the search functionality that in partnership with that AI-based tagging inside there. So again, that's a lovely little extra that I don't think is getting talked about loud enough. Whether other more affordable systems that have a similar architecture to this are going to feature that little TPU or CPU or MPU, whatever, there's so many names online for the AI component. I would say right now that AI processing component in conjunction with that CPU are the thing that make this quite an appealing NAS right now, at least in terms of the affordable bracket. That lack of 2.5 GBE in those USB 2 ports still annoy me, but still nonetheless I think the architecture as it stands is still pretty darn good. And the efficiency, the power consumption, if you live in a mobile home, living on a boat, looking for kind of deployment within a mobile office environment, this is going to be quite suitable for that. And again, you do have about 60 to 70% of the Qnap applications ready and available to you from their App Center. Anything a bit more GPU intensive, a little bit more graphical, OpenGL, that kind of stuff, that's not going to be here. None of your virtualization and stuff like that, but snapshots, backups, multimedia, all of those things, synchronization with cloud and more are supported. But for now, let's get this put back together and log into the user interface to take a good look at what's available to you, at least as far as the application center and QTS on this NAS. Let's go. Okay, so I've logged into the TS-233 here. I'm going to give you a very brief overview of QTS on this. As I mentioned, there will be a much fuller a lot more in-depth coverage of what this NAS and indeed the 1-bay can do, but I just wanted to sort of guide you through a lot of the options, what this supports, what it doesn't, and kind of an experience of what this system will be like to use. Because again, going back to my earlier point in the introduction, it's really important that you understand the difference between cheap and value and what you are actually looking for in a system. I'll also add right now that I'm about 1 foot away from my laptop that's doing about 5 different things at once here, so you can probably hear the fans of my laptop throughout the course of this, so I apologize if you are picking that up. But even if we go straight into the resource manager here, you can see that although I'm running quite a lot of processes, and at the bottom right of the screen here, if we zoom in a little bit, you're able to see where a lot of that is being used. So as you can see, of that 2 gig of memory, the system processes are taking up well over half a gigabyte there at 680 megabytes. After that, I've got different applications running different services there, and although it says that I'm only using 1.19 gig, the minute I wake up a number of these applications that are sitting in idle and kind of reserving an area of the memory or the cache, they will suddenly leap up and use a lot of that. So do bear that in mind once again when you're looking at more modest systems like this one. So a lot of the baseline stuff that you would expect from Qnap is available here. Obviously, for those of you that are concerned with security, everything from Qfirewall to the malware remover and the entire security center is available, and you can enable all of those and have scheduled or manual scans automatically available, with all of the different suggested security settings, policies and more, all adaptable on the fly there. On top of that, in terms of multimedia, you've got the usual ones: photo station, music station, video station for all your different application needs, as well as Plex Media Server. And indeed, you've got multimedia console there that allows you to control a lot of the indexing of those applications, which files and folders you want them to scan and which ones you don't. On top of that, you've got the overview of it. Lots of information on thumbnail generation if you want that to be actioned. I had to pause it there because thumbnail generation was using up a lot of the system resources there. Another thing to bear in mind with these more affordable systems, big tasks like that take a lot more time. Again, we've enabled a lot of the AI stuff already, and I've enabled some of the stuff such as the surveillance platform there as well, QVR Elite. Indeed, if we make our way into the storage manager there, you can see both of those drives, and you have access to everything from the hybrid mount system to, if you want to utilize an SSD in one of those bays, to have a kind of tiering or caching there in the background. And again, all of those options and settings can be sort of gone through all the way through here. But what you'll find throughout using a system with modest hardware like this is there's always going to be a little bit more of a delay in everything that you do. So just bear that in mind with these affordable systems, that everything's just going to take that pinch longer because the hardware resources you've got are less aggressive. Now, if we head into the App Center, you'll see that the bulk of the good applications and services, that a lot of the baseline stuff is available. Stuff like the multimedia applications, the backup applications, we'll talk a little bit about HBS3 shortly. And then you've got those multimedia apps as mentioned too. You've got a lot of the file management things such as QSearch, QFiling and more, all of them built into it here, but they do use quite a lot of those system resources in order to conduct most of them. And again, you've got the third-party applications too, all of them ready and available from within this user interface and downloadable at the click of a button. But just bear in mind that the more of these you run, the more of those system resources are going to get gobbled up. As you see, I'm not really doing anything on this device right now, and I've already used more than half of the available memory there. Now, we've talked about the App Center. We can talk a little bit about backups, because as mentioned, this 2-bay does support a number of different backup routines, everything from Apple Time Machine to a little bit more third-party rsync and real-time remote replication options there. And again, there's the delay on screen I talked about. Then you've got your USB copy that I mentioned earlier on about kind of setting what that button can do when you click it, whether you want it to action in one direction or the other, USB to NAS or NAS to USB, as well as adding a lot of those customized settings in terms of retention as well as file types to be built in as well. And then you've got the more detailed stuff with synchronization job, cron jobs, one-way sync, two-way sync, and the more, all of them built in there, all of which you can conduct from this user interface in your web browser. Now, as mentioned, all of these services can be installed on the system, but the more you install, the more system resources are going to be generally used day to day. Now, if we look at the one-bay system, as mentioned, I'm going to do a much fuller overview of QTS on these systems. You can see that in the case of this system and this one-bay that has that same 2 gig of memory, but a slightly lower frequency CPU there, the retention there is higher on that one bay, that tiny little difference there. Even though it's the same memory, because that CPU on it is 1.8 gigahertz rather than 2.0 gigahertz there, the resource utilization, it's leaning a little heavier. We're seeing more memory utilized there as the system is having to work a lot harder with that slightly less lower clock speed frequency CPU. And indeed, if we look at Plex Media Server there, we've got Plex Media Server already loaded up on the TS-133. We will be doing Plex Media Server testing there on the TS-133. And indeed, with AI photo recognition, we can see on that hardware specification, and again, this would be the same experience, but a slight bit better on the TS-233. As we see with this ARM A55 architecture there, again, we can access that AI recognition stuff, but there's just those tiny delays at all times. The ability when we're going through it for everything just takes a little bit longer there. If you want to enable facial recognition, the options are there to build in, and there's always going to be those tiny delays. Again, we can just chuck stuff in at all times, bang, done. And it will assign these things, but it just takes a little longer every time. If we make our way back into the Albums tab there, we'll be able to look at the choices if we want to look at thing recognition, something that Synology, the bigger competitor of Qnap, still has yet to re-establish. The idea that not only can you recognize people, you can also recognize things, food, landscapes, all kinds of stuff, all built in. And right now, the AI recognition is still in progress on that system, and I've had to pause it there before I allow it to continue. Otherwise, this would be a greater number of things being covered by the system. So it does run the bulk of services that Qnap offer, but just know that the hardware architecture this system has is going to mean you're going to have to wait a little bit longer, and you won't be able to run as many simultaneously without the system suddenly running out of memory quite quickly. Overall, I like this system. I think it's a good entry point into the Qnap ecosystem. I think it's going to be good as adding an extra layer to your existing storage backup. I would argue there are better Qnaps out there. I would certainly say that if you utilize this, you're going to hit a glass ceiling a lot earlier. But once again, like most other Qnap systems, this is a system that is built around the idea of the user knowing what they're doing to a degree. It has a slightly higher learning curve than some Qnap systems out there. So do bear in mind that you're going to want to go into those security areas and play with a lot of those settings, add whitelisted and blacklisted IPs as it happens. Start maybe looking into say Let's Encrypt SSL certificates to make sure you've got a secure connection, a network or otherwise. Make sure you change a lot of the network settings in the network settings manager that Qnap systems have, and get rid of those default ports. You don't want to be connecting via 8000, 8001 and more. You want to make sure things are as unique as possible. Qnap still has their remote access domain known as MyQnap Cloud, but a number of you utilize this not truly realizing the holes that you're punching in your router. And whether you get an expensive router or a cheap router, you've got to know what you're doing before you start punching holes around in your router configuration, opening ports and opening the doors to bad things. Yes, the brand has a responsibility, but you also have a responsibility to your own data. But this has been my review of the Qnap TS-233, a good, if arguably very safe in terms of at least release structure, NAS system. I like it, but I know there are better systems out there. And if you're already thinking about investing in the Qnap brand and you're on a tight budget, I think this system will suit your needs. I do consider it a value series and not a cheap NAS. I just wish it didn't have those poxy USB 2 ports, and maybe 1 GBE could have been slung out the window. Maybe a memory upgrade here or there, who knows. But otherwise, thank you so much for watching. There should be a review linked in the description over to NAS Compares, where I've detailed a lot more on this system, a lot more about the hardware architecture as well. So I recommend you check that out. A lot more photography as well. Otherwise, click like if you've enjoyed the video, subscribe to learn more. Thank you so much for watching. Use the free advice section over on NAS Compares if you need help. And again, I know how much data storage professionals cost, so having free advice, where's the harm? Other than that, I will see you next time.